Listen carefully. This message is not for everyone. If you feel something tightening in your chest right now, if your spirit feels alert instead of entertained, that's not random. That's recognition. You didn't stumble on this video by accident. For a long time, you've been suppressing something powerful, not because you were weak, not because you lacked faith, but because the weight of what you carry was heavier than you were ready to hold. And the truth is, the world you were born into was never designed to handle the fullness of who you are. You are not broken. You were restrained. There is a difference. Chosen ones don't awaken gently. They awaken through pressure, loss, isolation, and confusion. You felt it. That strange tension between who you are and who you've been forced to become just to survive. You learned to dim your intuition. You questioned your spiritual authority. You second-guessed your inner voice because every time you trusted it, something collapsed around you. Relationships ended. Doors closed, comfort disappeared, and you started believing that the safest thing to do was to suppress your power. But hear this clearly. Suppression has an expiration date, and that date has arrived. Right now, what you are experiencing is not chaos, it is activation. The reason things feel intense, emotional, and impossible to ignore is because what you buried is rising. The gifts you delayed are demanding expression. The calling you tried to outrun is now standing directly in front of you. Scripture confirms this pattern. Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Set apart does not mean celebrated. It means separated, isolated, misunderstood. That separation wasn't punishment. It was protection. You were being preserved until the moment you could carry what you were chosen to release. And if this message is hitting you deeply, pause for a second, take a breath, and do something important. Like this video and subscribe right now, because this channel is not entertainment. It's alignment. These messages reach chosen ones at exact moments of activation, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. And if you feel led, consider supporting this channel with a super thanks. Not as a transaction, but as a declaration, a signal that you are ready to invest in your calling instead of suppressing it. Even small acts of alignment matter when you are chosen. Now stay with me, because the reason your power is activating now is not random timing. It's strategic timing. You had to be emptied before you could be filled correctly. You had to lose false identities before your true authority could emerge. God does not activate chosen ones early. He activates them when their character can carry the weight of their assignment. That's why this feels different. This isn't excitement. This is inevitability. The old version of you can't survive this next phase. And deep down, you already know that. You've felt the internal shift. The patience wearing thin, the silence growing louder, the hunger for truth becoming impossible to ignore. You didn't suppress your power forever. You suppressed it until now. If you've ever wondered why it took so long for things to shift, why your life felt paused while others moved ahead, this section is for you. Because the delay you experienced was never rejection, it was divine restraint. Chosen ones are never activated on the same timeline as everyone else. You were delayed because your assignment required depth, not speed. If your power had been activated earlier, it would have destroyed you, or worse. It would have been weaponized by the wrong environment. God does not release authority into immature hands, even when the heart is pure. That's why your life felt slow while your spirit felt restless. The Bible shows this pattern again and again. Joseph was given prophetic dreams early, but his authority didn't activate until years later. After betrayal, isolation, false accusations, and prison, David was anointed king as a teenager, but he didn't sit on the throne until he was forged. Through wilderness seasons and pursued by enemies. Even Jesus waited 30 years before beginning his public ministry. Activation is not about talent, it's about timing. What you thought was being left behind was actually divine protection. You were being hidden, refined, stripped of false dependencies. Because the power assigned to you does not function safely in shallow soil. And here's the part most people don't understand. Your suppression wasn't just external, it was internal. You questioned yourself because you had to. You doubted your intuition because discernment had to be sharpened. You experienced confusion because clarity had not yet been earned. Chosen ones are not handed confidence, they develop it through survival. That's why your awakening feels heavy instead of exciting. You weren't asleep, you were in training. Ecclesiastes 3:1 says, "To everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven. You were not late. You were early for something that wasn't ready yet." The environment around you couldn't support the frequency you carry, so God delayed the activation until your internal structure matched your external calling. This is where many chosen ones break. They compare their timeline to others. They internalize the delay as failure. They start shrinking themselves to fit spaces they've already outgrown, and in doing so, they suppress the very thing they were chosen to release. But suppression was temporary. The reason your power is activating now is because the training phase is ending. You've learned restraint, you've learned patience, you've learned humility, you've learned discernment the hard way. You no longer give your energy freely. You no longer trust blindly. You no longer confuse noise for direction. That's not trauma, that's wisdom. Isaiah 49:2 says, "He made my mouth like a sharpened sword. In the shadow of his hand he hid me." Notice that phrase, "He hid me." Chosen ones are hidden before they are revealed, not because they lack power, but because power without discipline is dangerous. You had to be hidden until your character could carry the authority that's now coming online. And here's the confirmation you've been waiting for. The frustration you've been feeling lately is not impatience, it's activation pressure. When a calling is ready to emerge, the old life becomes unbearable. Familiar patterns feel empty. Distractions stop working. Silence becomes loud. That's the signal. You're not behind. You're not lost. You're not broken. You were delayed on purpose, and now that delay has served its role. Before anything changes around a chosen one, everything changes within them. Activation is an internal event long before it becomes visible. That's why what you're experiencing may feel confusing, emotional, and even overwhelming. But these are not symptoms of imbalance. They are signs of alignment. One of the first signs of activation is heightened awareness. You're noticing things you used to ignore. Conversations feel shallow. Repetition feels unbearable. You can sense when something is off, even if you can't explain why. Your intuition has become sharper, louder, harder to silence. This isn't anxiety. This is discernment turning on after a long period of dormancy. Hebrews 5:14 says, "Solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil." That training didn't happen overnight. It happened through your confusion, your disappointment, and your isolation. Another powerful sign is emotional resurfacing. Old memories come back without warning. Emotions you thought you healed from suddenly demand attention. You may find yourself grieving things you already survived. This doesn't mean you're going backward. It means unresolved layers are coming up to be released before your power fully activates. God never builds on unstable foundations. That's why chosen ones are forced to feel deeply. What you don't face cannot be carried forward. Suppression kept you functioning. Activation requires honesty. You may also notice a growing intolerance for misalignment. People who once felt familiar now feel draining. Environments that once felt safe now feel restrictive. You're no longer able to pretend, perform, or people please. Your spirit resists compromise because it knows the cost of disobedience. This is not rebellion, it's sovereignty awakening. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Transformation doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels disruptive. Your mind is shedding patterns that once kept you accepted but spiritually confined. Another sign is spiritual exhaustion paired with inner clarity. You may feel tired physically, yet mentally sharp. Emotionally drained, yet spiritually alert. This is because activation requires energy. Old habits are dying. New authority is forming. Your nervous system is adjusting to a higher level of responsibility. Think of it as spiritual recalibration. You're also becoming more comfortable with solitude, not because you dislike people, but because silence is now informative. You hear more when there's less noise. Solitude is no longer loneliness. It's restoration. Even Jesus withdrew often before major movements. Mark 1:35 says, "Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house and went off to a solitary place where he prayed." Activation creates a hunger for clarity, not validation. You may also notice a strange calm during chaos. Things that used to trigger you don't have the same grip. You're observing more and reacting less. This isn't numbness. It's emotional authority forming. You're learning to respond from wisdom instead of wounds. And finally, there is an inner knowing you can't explain, a quiet confidence. Not arrogance, not certainty about the details, but certainty about direction. You may not know how things will unfold, but you know you can't go back. That knowing is sacred. It's the signal that suppression has ended and stewardship has begun. You are not becoming someone new. You are remembering who you were before survival forced you to forget. One of the hardest truths for chosen ones to accept is this. Your greatest losses were not accidents. They were assignments. If your power had activated while you were still surrounded by the wrong people, you would have either given it away or allowed it to be diluted. God does not awaken authority in crowded rooms. He awakens it in isolation, where there is no applause, no distraction, and no external influence. That's why so much was removed. Friends you trusted disappeared. Relationships you invested in collapsed. Support you expected never came. And for a long time it felt like abandonment. But what was really happening was separation. Jesus himself was led into the wilderness before beginning his ministry. Matthew 4:1 says, "Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted." Notice this carefully. He wasn't pushed there by failure. He was led there by the Spirit. Isolation was not a consequence. It was a requirement. Chosen ones must learn who they are without validation. If people had stayed, you might have relied on their approval instead of divine direction. If comfort had remained, you might have delayed obedience. Loss stripped away every false source of identity so that your power would be rooted in truth, not attachment. Betrayal played a role too. Those closest to you revealed their true intentions not to destroy you, but to awaken discernment. Chosen ones are naturally trusting. Without betrayal, that trust can become dangerous. So God allows betrayal to sharpen perception and protect the assignment. Psalm 55:12-14 speaks to this pain clearly. "If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. But it is you, a close companion, my friend." That verse exists because betrayal is part of the calling. You didn't lose people because you were unworthy. You lost them because they couldn't go where you're being taken. And here's what most people miss. Isolation doesn't just remove others. It reveals you. In solitude, your fears surface. Your doubts speak louder. Your true beliefs are exposed. This is where chosen ones confront themselves without distractions. This is where suppressed power begins to stir, because there's nowhere left to hide from it. That's why isolation felt unbearable at first. But over time, something shifted. You stopped begging for connection. You stopped chasing explanations. You stopped trying to be understood. You became self-led. Isaiah 30:21 says, "Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, 'This is the way. Walk in it.'" That voice becomes audible only when external noise is removed. Loss made space. Isolation created clarity. And once clarity forms, power follows. You also had to experience emotional breaking, because unbroken power is dangerous. Authority without humility becomes control. Wisdom without compassion becomes judgment. Your pain taught you empathy. Your loneliness taught you patience. Your confusion taught you dependence on God instead of certainty. You didn't just survive loss. You were reshaped by it. Now, as your power activates, you're no longer seeking revenge, validation, or recognition. You're seeking alignment. That's how you know the preparation worked. You are not activated to dominate. You are activated to steward. Activation is not a reward. It is a responsibility. This is where many people misunderstand what it means to be chosen. Power is not given to elevate the ego. It is entrusted to those who can carry it without being consumed by it. If your activation is real, you will feel the weight before you feel the reward. Chosen ones are held to a higher standard, whether they asked for it or not. Luke 12:48 says, "From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded." That verse isn't motivational, it's sobering. When your power activates, excuses expire. You are no longer operating from ignorance. You are operating from awareness, and awareness carries accountability. This is why your life feels more intense than others. You can't get away with things that others do. Shortcuts backfire. Compromise drains you. Silence feels heavy when you know you should speak. Obedience becomes non-negotiable, not because you're controlled, but because your spirit recognizes consequence more clearly. Activated power responds immediately to misuse. That's intentional. God corrects chosen ones quickly because delay leads to distortion. When power is misused, it harms not only the carrier, but everyone connected to the assignment, so correction becomes sharper, faster, and more personal. Hebrews 12:6 says, "The Lord disciplines the one he loves." Discipline is not rejection, it is investment. Another responsibility of activation is restraint. Just because you can see doesn't mean you should expose. Just because you can speak doesn't mean you should confront. Just because you're right doesn't mean you're called to act. Discernment without restraint becomes destruction. Jesus knew things he never revealed. He saw intentions he never confronted. Power without timing is immaturity. You're learning that now. This is why silence has become sacred to you. Why you choose peace over proving a point. Why you walk away instead of engaging. That's not fear, that's mastery. Another responsibility is stewardship of energy. Your presence affects rooms. Your words linger. Your emotions shift environments. That means you must guard your energy carefully. Not everyone deserves access. Not every battle deserves engagement. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Activation teaches you to say no without guilt and yes without hesitation. It also demands integrity. When your power activates, your private life must align with your public calling. There is no separation. What you tolerate in secret eventually leaks into your assignment. This is why you've been forced to confront habits, patterns, and cycles that others ignore for years. You're being purified, not punished. And finally, activated power requires surrender, not to people, not to fear, but to purpose. You don't get to choose whether you're chosen. You only choose whether you cooperate. Resisting the calling creates internal conflict. Embracing it creates peace, even when the path is difficult. That's why, despite everything you've been through, something inside you feels settled now. You're no longer asking, "Why me?" You're starting to ask, "What now?" That question signals readiness. When a chosen one stops suppressing their power, the first changes do not happen in the world. They happen in alignment, but once alignment is established, the external world is forced to respond. Not because you demand it, not because you announce it, but because truth carries weight. One of the earliest changes you'll notice is resistance. People begin to respond to you differently. Some feel drawn to you. Others feel uncomfortable around you without knowing why. Your presence becomes clarifying. It exposes what's real and what's not. And exposure always creates reaction. Jesus experienced this constantly. Luke 4:28-29 describes how people were amazed by his words one moment and enraged the next. Activated power doesn't create neutral responses. It brings things to the surface. You may notice that certain people distance themselves. Conversations grow awkward. Familiar dynamics no longer work. This is not rejection. It's incompatibility being revealed. When you stop shrinking, those who benefited from your silence lose access. Another change is increased influence without effort. You're no longer trying to be heard, yet people listen. You're no longer chasing opportunity, yet doors begin to open. This isn't charisma. It's authority. Authority doesn't force entry. It's recognized. Proverbs 16:7 says, "When a person's ways please the Lord, he makes even their enemies live at peace with them." That peace doesn't mean approval. It means alignment creates protection. You'll also notice a sharpening of boundaries. You're quicker to disengage from chaos. You stop over-explaining. You no longer feel the need to prove your intentions. This confuses people who were used to your accessibility. But chosen ones must become selective. Unlimited access leads to depletion. Your time becomes valuable because your purpose is active. Another major shift is momentum. Things that felt stuck begin to move. Not all at once, not perfectly, but direction becomes clear. You're no longer spinning in confusion. You may still face challenges, but they feel purposeful instead of draining. This is what Isaiah 45:2 refers to when it says, "I will go before you and level the mountains." The obstacles don't disappear. They become manageable. You may also notice increased spiritual sensitivity. Your prayers feel sharper. Your discernment is quicker. You sense when to act and when to wait. This doesn't make you flawless. It makes you responsive. Suppression dulls sensitivity. Activation sharpens it, but there is also loss. Not everyone celebrates your emergence. Some misunderstand your boundaries as arrogance. Some label your clarity as distance. This is why Jesus said in Matthew 10:36 that a person's enemies may be those of their own household. This isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to prepare you. Activated power reorganizes relationships. Some are strengthened, others are released. This reordering is not cruelty, it's correction. And perhaps the most surprising change is peace. Not excitement, not constant joy, Peace. A steady sense of rightness, even in uncertainty. A quiet confidence that you are where you're meant to be, even when the road is unfamiliar. Suppression creates anxiety. Activation creates calm. You stop asking for signs because you become the sign. Once your power activates, going back is no longer an option, not because you are trapped, but because awareness changes responsibility. Suppression after activation doesn't bring peace. It creates internal conflict. You've felt this already. Things that once worked to numb you no longer do. Distractions feel empty. Old habits feel heavy. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Not because it's quiet, but because it's honest. Your spirit knows when you're avoiding what you've been called to face. This is why chosen ones who try to return to their old lives experience anxiety, exhaustion, and frustration. Not as punishment, as warning. Jonah is the clearest biblical example of this. When Jonah ran from his assignment, life didn't become easier. It became chaotic. Storms followed him. Restlessness consumed him. His attempt to suppress his calling created disorder everywhere he went. Not because God was angry, but because Jonah was misaligned. Jonah 1:3-4 shows this clearly. He fled, and the Lord sent a great wind on the sea. Misalignment creates turbulence. You are feeling resistance now because you've outgrown survival mode. What once protected you now restricts you. Suppression served a purpose in earlier seasons. It kept you functional when you weren't ready, but now it creates friction because your power requires expression. Another danger of resuppression is self-betrayal. You know too much now. You see patterns clearly. You recognize truth quickly. Pretending not to see what you see fractures your integrity. And integrity is the foundation of authority. Chosen ones lose power when they betray themselves to maintain comfort. Jesus addressed this directly. Matthew 16:25 says, "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." That verse isn't about self-destruction. It's about surrendering false safety. Trying to preserve the old version of you will cost you the new one. You may also notice spiritual stagnation when you suppress again. Your prayers feel blocked. Your intuition feels dull. Your motivation disappears. This doesn't mean you've lost your calling. It means you're resisting it. Power flows through obedience, not intention. And here's the truth many avoid. Suppression after activation attracts frustration into your life. Doors close. Momentum stalls. Opportunities fade. Not because you are unworthy, but because the universe responds to alignment. When you move out of position, resistance increases. This is why staying small now feels unbearable. Your spirit is demanding expansion. Another risk is bitterness. When chosen ones suppress their power, they often project their dissatisfaction onto others. They become critical, withdrawn, cynical, not because they're negative people, but because their purpose is being choked. You were not designed to live muted. And finally, resuppression delays impact. Your power is not just for you. It's meant to serve, heal, guide, and shift environments. When you hold it back, others miss what only you can release. That weight is why ignoring your calling feels heavy. You're not being pressured. You're being summoned. There is no condemnation here, only clarity. You are not required to be perfect. You are required to be honest. Activation does not mean rushing forward. It means moving correctly. One of the greatest mistakes chosen ones make after awakening is assuming that power requires constant action. It does not. It requires alignment. When your power activates, the goal is not to do more. It's to do what you're assigned, at the pace you're instructed. Fear tells you to hesitate. Pride tells you to rush. Wisdom tells you to listen. Proverbs 19:2 says, "Desire without knowledge is not good, and whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way." Activation without patience leads to exhaustion. You're not here to prove anything. You're here to steward something sacred. The first way you walk forward correctly is by staying rooted. Prayer, reflection, and solitude are not optional for chosen ones. They are maintenance. Power that isn't grounded becomes unstable. This is why Jesus consistently withdrew, even when crowds demanded him. He did not allow urgency to override alignment. Mark 6:31 shows this clearly when Jesus says, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." Rest is not retreat. It is reinforcement. Another key is humility. Humility does not mean shrinking. It means staying teachable. Chosen ones who believe they have arrived stop receiving guidance. The moment you think you're above correction, you become vulnerable to error. James 4:6 reminds us, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Grace is what keeps your power clean. It ensures your authority heals instead of harms. You also walk forward by honoring limits. Just because you can carry weight doesn't mean you should carry everything. You are not responsible for fixing everyone. You are responsible for obeying your assignment. Overextending yourself leads to burnout, and burnout dulls discernment. Even Moses needed boundaries. Exodus 18 shows Moses collapsing under responsibility until he was advised to delegate. Chosen ones must learn that sustainability is spiritual. Another essential practice is patience with process. Your activation is real, but its expression unfolds in layers. You don't become fully formed overnight. Growth continues even after awakening. Comparing your journey to others creates unnecessary pressure. Galatians 6:9 says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Timing still matters. You also walk forward by guarding your motives. Ask yourself regularly, why am I doing this? Is it to be seen or to serve? Is it to be validated or to be obedient? Motives determine longevity. Power fueled by ego collapses quickly. Power fueled by purpose endures. And finally, you walk forward by trusting God with the outcome. Your job is obedience. The results are not your burden. When chosen ones try to control outcomes, anxiety increases. When they surrender outcomes, peace follows. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." Understanding comes later. Alignment comes first. You don't need to announce your power. You don't need to defend your calling. You don't need to rush your unfolding. Walk steadily. Stay grounded. Remain open. This activation is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning of alignment. Everything you've endured, every delay, every loss, every season of suppression was leading here. Not to a title, not to recognition, but to clarity. You now know who you are, and more importantly, who you are not. That knowing changes everything. When a chosen one fully activates, life doesn't become perfect. It becomes purposeful. You stop chasing outcomes and start walking in direction. You stop asking for permission to be who you were designed to be. You stop negotiating with fear. This is what Romans 8:28 points to when it says, "In all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Purpose is the lens that redefines your past. Your pain was not wasted. Your isolation was not empty. Your suppression was not failure. It was formation. As your activation settles, you'll notice a shift in how you view your life story. The shame dissolves. The regret softens. The confusion loses its grip. Not because everything makes sense, but because meaning replaces doubt. Chosen ones don't erase their past, they redeem it. You will also begin to attract alignment naturally, not just opportunities, but people who resonate with truth instead of convenience. Conversations become deeper, connections become cleaner. You no longer bond through trauma, but through purpose. This doesn't make life easier, it makes it real. And yes, there will still be challenges. Activation does not remove opposition, it reveals strength. Resistance doesn't mean you're off path. It often confirms that you're walking in the right direction. Light is always noticed by darkness, but it is never overcome by it. John 1:5 says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." That's your assurance. You are not activated to impress. You are activated to impact. Whether your influence is loud or quiet, public or private, visible or unseen, it matters. Your obedience creates ripple effects you may never witness. This is why humility remains essential. The goal is not to be known. The goal is to be faithful. Your life will never return to what it was before this awakening. And that's not loss, that's growth. The old version of you served its purpose. It kept you alive until you were ready to live intentionally. Now you walk differently, with discernment instead of doubt, with peace instead of pressure, with authority instead of apology. You don't need to force what's coming next. Alignment is already at work. Doors will open when they're meant to. Clarity will come when it's required. Strength will rise when it's needed. All you are asked to do now is remain honest, obedient, and grounded. And if this message confirmed something you've been feeling but couldn't explain, take a moment to acknowledge it. That recognition matters. You are not late. You are not behind. You are right on time. The power you suppressed is no longer waiting. It's active. and you are ready to carry it. Stay aligned, stay humble, and keep walking forward.